All right. Good morning. Thank you all for joining us for another of our Coffee with the Ranger series this month. I am Jessica Barnes-Green. I'm the Director of Outer Banks Forever. And I'm very excited to be joined today by your Outer Banks National Park Superintendent, Dave Hallac. Good morning, Dave.
Good morning, Jess. Great to be with you.
So we're going to talk a little bit today about just our national parks in general. So Public Lands Day is coming up this weekend, which is always exciting. It's just a great way for us to celebrate our public lands, including our national parks. So Dave, why don't we start off with just tell us a little bit about yourself and your work with the parks. And I know there's nothing like a typical week in the National Park Service, probably for you especially, but a little bit about what you do here in the Outer Banks.
Sure. Thanks, Jess. So as the superintendent of the National Parks of Eastern North Carolina, I have the pleasure of helping to steward all of the resources and help to facilitate visitor access for 5 national parks in Eastern North Carolina, including Wright Brothers National Memorial, Fort Raleigh National Historic Site, Cape Hatteras National Seashore, Cape Lookout National Seashore, and Moores Creek National Battlefield. On a day-to-day basis, I'm managing the 3 northern parks, Wright Brothers, Fort Raleigh, and Cape Hatteras. And you're right, there is no typical day for me. Oftentimes I'm in my office at our headquarters, which is located at Fort Raleigh National Historic Site on northern Roanoke Island. Other days I might be out in the field visiting with partners down on the beach, for example, in Buxton, maybe inspecting the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, possibly on Ocracoke Island, working with our partners at Hyde County there. So I tend to get around a little bit and really do my best to both stay in touch with what's happening on the ground and what our staff are doing on the ground to protect resources and welcome visitors, but also to help provide strategic direction for the parks. Help to manage our financial situation in terms of the great money that we have from Congress and all the other sources of funding that we have, and also manage our staffing to make sure we're putting the best expertise in the right places to address the most important priorities for the parks.
That's a lot of parks to manage. It's a lot just having 3 here, but you have 2 additional parks, like you mentioned, that are part of your purview, and that's a lot of work.
You know, it is a lot of work, but we have an incredible team. So when we look down at places like Moores Creek National Battlefield and Cape Lookout National Seashore, there are superintendents at both of those parks that work very closely with me that are able to mostly manage those parks on a day-to-day basis. They are fully engaged in their local communities. And what we do is we share information and best practices, and we're able to be more efficient, including by sharing certain positions where there's a lot of commonalities between the parks. Additionally, up in the northern parks here, we have a great leadership team. These are folks that have expertise on every topic you can imagine, from law enforcement to how to make water. We manage 2 water treatment plants that the public may not be aware of, to how to maintain up to 60 septic systems that we have, to experts in the best replacement roofs for our 230 buildings. So we really have a breadth of expertise here, and it's the hard work and the experience and the knowledge of that team that really helps to ensure that we can effectively manage the parks.
Yeah, and I can attest to just how wonderful it is to work with you and your team. So as a reminder, we launched Outer Banks Forever as the official nonprofit partner of our Outer Banks National Parks in 2019. Which doesn't sound that long ago, but feels a lot longer. It feels like we've been here a long time, and it's been great to work with your team. A lot of them have, to your point, expertise in these areas, but also have experience working in different national parks, which I know you do as well. And that was one of the fun things, I think, for me coming into this. I came from the Shenandoah National Park Trust, so working at a friends group for a different national park. Getting to come here and start this from scratch was really interesting. But could you just share a little bit about how you got to the Outer Banks and a little bit about your history in the National Park Service?
Sure. I started my federal career actually just over 20 years ago, but my background before that is in both biology and wildlife and fisheries biology. And so I started with the Fish and Wildlife Service in Vero Beach, and I had opportunities to work on incredible projects there, including managing lakes for both fisheries and endangered species in the Kissimmee chain of lakes, which, by the way, is just around the Orlando area, if you're not familiar with where that is, to working on the River Restoration Project, which was one of the largest prominent projects where a river that was once channelized by humans was able to be restored to have a natural meandering river with oxbows and floodplains and function properly and provide a lot of ecosystem services and support to wildlife habitat. Within that job with the Fish and Wildlife Service, I also was assigned to work on certain Everglades restoration projects. There is a very large program in South Florida called the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, which is a multi-billion-dollar project to restore the South Florida ecosystem and also ensure that communities around South Florida can be flood protected and have ample drinking water. So I got into that area of ecosystem management, and within a few years ended up getting a great job at Everglades National Park, which was my first Park Service job. And it was thrilling to have this job because I didn't realize that the National Park Service was probably home for me until I got there. And I realized that all of my passion and interest and expertise in managing things like fisheries and endangered species, and not only both of those wildlife and fisheries components, but also the public's ability to access those wonderful natural resources and to recreate on public lands. Speaking of Public Lands Day, that was a passion as well, something that I love to do in my free time. So all of a sudden I found this job, and when I got there, I realized I was home, that this really was the intersection of conservation, natural resource and cultural resource management with the public, with America's ability to enjoy those wonders. So when I got there, I knew I was in the right place for the rest of my career. I spent several years at both Everglades and Dry Tortugas National Parks, had amazing opportunities to work on additional things related to Everglades restoration. I mean, I did everything from helping to survey some of the rarest birds in the world down in the Southern Everglades to help to monitor and fend off female alligators that were defending their nests during the reproductive season, to helping to protect coral reefs and fisheries in the Dry Tortugas. So this was an amazing opportunity and a great place to work when you consider the intersection of these unique global natural resources and treasures right outside of millions of people living in the Miami metropolitan area. So a lot of incredible experiences there, really great opportunities to learn the skills of partnering. There is no way for us as park managers to manage our parks in isolation. We're surrounded by other lands, we're surrounded by development, and unless we are working really closely with counties, with state governments, and with our neighbors, we are not going to reach our potential in terms of doing our jobs inside the park. So that was one of the most amazing things about working in South Florida, was learning those skills and having those experiences to work with partners outside the park to help achieve our land management goals. From there, I had an amazing opportunity to go and serve as the director of the Yellowstone Center for Resources at Yellowstone National Park, where I managed not only the natural resources, but also the cultural resources, and also Native American relationships and planning and compliance for the park. I had a phenomenal team there of some of the world's experts in everything from carnivore management for things like grizzly bears and wolves, to the management of native fish species in places like the Yellowstone River, to geologists that were experts on the Yellowstone caldera. Yellowstone National Park is sitting on top of a volcano. I also was able to continue a lot of the partnership work that I did in South Florida, but now on a much bigger scale with 2.2 million acres, with 3 surrounding states, Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, And it was just an amazing opportunity to work in one of the most intact ecosystems in the world. Following that amazing experience, I had a great opportunity here in the Outer Banks to manage Cape Hatteras, Wright Brothers, and Fort Raleigh as superintendent. And this was a different role for me to step up not only from managing natural and cultural resources on a daily basis, but to managing the whole operation, from the finances to the maintenance side of the operation, to being concerned about and helping to provide strategic direction for law enforcement and visitor services. So I really embraced the opportunity. We moved a couple thousand miles east, back here in Eastern North Carolina, and I have been working as superintendent now for about 6 years, and it's been incredible. One of the things that's really struck me about the Outer Banks is the passion that our local community has. And that's one of the reasons why I'm so fortunate for Outer Banks Forever and your leadership, Jess, giving the public an opportunity to stay connected to our parks through organizations, friends groups like Outer Banks Forever is something very special. And you and your organization and the community can serve as a force multiplier for education, for helping to provide volunteer opportunities, and in many cases, just like the Kayak launch that you all supported, to provide financial support that allows us to reach a level of excellence that we would not reach alone. So thank you.
Yeah, well, it's a fun job. It's an exciting job. To your point, I think the Outer Banks community, people here, both visitors and locals, love this community so much. And you mentioned in the other parks, so there are these sort of larger parks like Yellowstone, and even Everglades is fairly large, but it's also outside of Miami, so it's outside of this large community. And I feel like one of the things that's unique about the Outer Banks is, for our size community, which is, at least geographically, we're stretched out pretty far, but it's not a huge community. To have 3 national parks here is pretty unique and special. And so can you just talk a little bit about what ways do our national parks support our local community, especially ways I think people maybe don't know?
Sure. So one of the ways that the parks in the Outer Banks here, and you're right, we are so lucky to have 3 national parks really on a thin strip of banks and barrier islands right here in Dare and Hyde counties. But one of the ways that the parks help to support the local community is one that's actually very personal to me, and that is through education. I have children that are in the Dare County school system, and experiential learning and inspiration through seeing and doing is something that is special, that not everybody has an opportunity to see or be exposed to, depending where you are geographically. So here in both Dare and Hyde counties, our local school systems, our residents, and all of the children living in this area have the opportunity to go to a place like Wright Brothers and think a little bit about what the Wright Brothers did, their amazing accomplishments right here in their backyard, a place where they might ride their bikes by on their way to school on a daily basis, and to be inspired by the hard work and determination that the Wright Brothers used to have their accomplishments, to be inspired by the level of knowledge that they acquired, by their determination, by their resourcefulness in terms of bringing local community members in to help them. But this idea of some level of discipline, studying things, trying hard, and achieving is something that not everybody has an opportunity to be inspired by, maybe just looking from the highway and seeing the monument, the beautiful monument here. So that's a perfect example of that inspiration and that exposure that Wright Brothers provides. A place like Cape Hatteras National Seashore similarly provides inspiration and educational opportunities about barrier islands and oceanography and a changing world, whether it's things like climate change or meteorology. Nobody that lives in the Outer Banks for more than a couple of years doesn't have at least some basic education, maybe through the School of Hard Knocks, about tropical storms and nor'easters and hurricanes. Additionally, a place like Fort Raleigh National Historic Site provides an opportunity to learn more about European travels to the United States, the founding of the United States, a lot about civil rights and the Freedmen's Colony here at Fort Raleigh National Historic Site, which is not only an important piece of America's history, but part of the story of America's history that is not always pleasant to learn about, but is so important to tell that full story about the history of America and some of the things that occurred that was not always respectful of all cultures, races, and religions in the United States. So when you think about these stories, these experiences and these resources that are right in the backyard here, it strikes me most of all that it is such a great opportunity and such a great resource and something special that particularly our youth in the Outer Banks have the ability to experience, maybe like folks may not have in many other locations throughout the US.
Yeah, and I think going back to in the beginning, you mentioned, being able to recreate in national parks, I think is such an important part of our Outer Banks community. I think I know that you and I and our board have talked about sometimes, especially at Cape Hatteras National Seashore, I don't think people always understand that when they come down here with their families and they rent a beach house in Avon and their beachfront, when they walk over that dune, they're in Cape Hatteras National Seashore. So the seashore is that whole protected beach on Hatteras Island, and that our community could look very, very different. It could have a lot more development and a lot more things going on, like you see in some of the other East Coast beaches, but it doesn't, because our park is here to protect that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jess. And when you look at the national parks of Eastern North Carolina, between Cape Hatteras National Seashore, which from South Nags Head to the tip of Ocracoke is about 80 miles long, and then you look at Cape Lookout National Seashore from the tip of Portsmouth Island all the way to the southern end of Shackleford Banks, you realize that your national seashores in Eastern North Carolina represent more than 40% of the Atlantic facing coastline. And these are conservation lands, so we are managing them for natural processes, in some cases for rare or unique species of wildlife to have habitat on. But we're also managing them for everybody. So everybody has an opportunity to access those lands and to really enjoy their national seashores. So it really is a special place.
Yeah, and I know several of us here, I think Fort Raleigh is sort of a gem to all of us that I think not as many people make the time to visit or even think to visit. But I had an opportunity to be at Fort Raleigh, where you are now, yesterday, and we have some pretty exciting things going on there, and had an interesting conversation with the archaeologists who are working there. So there is an archaeological dig going on at Fort Raleigh. They are looking at just trying to learn more about some of the English explorers that came here even prior to the Lost Colony, which is what Fort Raleigh is most known for. But like you said, there's so many different stories there that really show the history of our nation, really from the beginning. And what was interesting was the archaeologist was saying that at a lot of dig sites that he has that aren't on public lands, it's difficult to do archaeological work because, sometimes those lands are developed, or they were developed and now they're not. But our national parks really do protect the land in a very unique way. So it's almost like we've created this time capsule by having the land protected, where they can really dig in, literally, to the archaeological work and learn more about our history here. So we're really excited. We're going to be bringing those of you who are watching later this week, you'll get a little behind the scenes of that archaeological dig. But I just really liked his perspective from his standpoint, that having lands that are protected means that he doesn't have to rush his work. He knows that that land is going to be there and will be protected to be able to continue to do the science research that he does.
That's a terrific story, Jess. And actually, it really embodies three of the things that we do best within the National Park Service. We protect the lands. In many cases, you've probably heard the term Parks for Science and Science for Parks. We are locations where, as long as research and monitoring and scientific study can be done without impacting resources, that we really promote those studies, whether they're archaeological studies or perhaps studies on sea turtles. And the third aspect of what we do really well is educate the public. So as you noted, the archaeological dig that's occurring here with our partners, the First Colony Foundation, is also being interpreted through special programs that we have going on 7 days a week between around 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. We have our interpretation and education rangers out there answering questions. And the day that this started, I was fascinated by the number of people that arrived just to see this. One of the things I do sometimes to get a little exercise and get out of my office is I'll do some of my phone calls walking outside on my cell phone. And I was walking around the park and I noticed all of these cars streaming in, and folks even looked at parking spaces. And after I got off the phone, I talked to a couple of visitors, and they were all here to learn more about the archaeological study. So what a really great opportunity for the public to learn more about science in parks.
Yeah, so like I said, we're going to bring everyone a little behind the scenes video about that next week, which is exciting. But you kind of touched on something that we wanted to talk about today. So we have been having record visitation at almost all of the parks over the past 2 years specifically. So a lot of people coming to the Outer Banks, a lot of new people who are just discovering the Outer Banks, I think. So can you just talk to us a little bit about, how does that increase in visitation, how does that impact our national parks here in the Outer Banks and the work that you all do?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. So to give a little background, we'll maybe talk specifically about Cape Hatteras National Seashore. And when I first arrived at the park, it was common to have around 2 to 2.1 million visits. And as you pointed out, last year, we had more than 2.6 million visits. And the first 8 months of 2021 are on track to be the busiest year we have ever seen. So, we have 4 more months to determine what our final numbers will look like, but we're likely to be either the busiest or have maybe the second busiest visitor season ever. That's exciting. There is probably nothing better than to know that the national parks are being loved by Americans, that Americans are coming to their national parks for inspiration, for recreation, and to enjoy the great outdoors. That being said, that level of visitors, especially in a small place like Cape Hatteras National Seashore, Cape Hatteras is not a big park like Yellowstone with 2.2 million acres. We are a park that is mostly a place where people come to the beach. And when we have millions of visitors, or certainly tens of thousands of visitors during the summertime, all on that white sandy patch between the edge of the dune and the water, there are definitely some challenges that do arise. That being said, I have been so impressed that the large majority of our visitors have been respectful and have really had a safe and enjoyable visit to the seashore. So once we saw some of this increased level of visitation over the last few years, we have employed strategies to try to rise to the occasion of managing this new level of visitation. And one of the ways that we did that is to embrace technology. So you're probably well aware that one of the things that we do at the seashore and at all the parks here in the Outer Banks is sometimes we collect fees. Those fees can be to come and camp at one of our 4 campgrounds, Oregon Inlet, Cape Point, Frisco, and Ocracoke. Those fees are sometimes collected if you're climbing a lighthouse like the Body Island or Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, or maybe using the Silver Lake Marina on Ocracoke Island to spend a week on your boat. We also collect fees for off-road vehicle permits to allow the public to safely drive on the beach after securing a permit and watching an educational video. So you look at fee collection, and that was something that we have traditionally been putting a lot of staff time into. In-person fee collection, whether it was swiping a charge card or taking cash from a visitor. And those staff that we had doing that work are incredible staff. They're great in terms of their ability to interact with the public. They also, not surprisingly, get dozens of questions all day long about the parks, about the visitor opportunities. So we made a strategic decision to see if we could embrace technology as a fee collection solution and take all of those staff and redeploy them in the field. Sometimes you hear the term boots on the ground, but have our staff out on our off-road vehicle ramps, out on the beaches, educate the public, help give them information about opportunities and also hazards at the seashore so that their experience can be as safe and enjoyable as it can. And we can have maybe a more orderly and more manageable visitor season at Cape Hatteras National Seashore. And that's exactly what we've done. Our entire fee collection program is now online, and all of those same staff are doing incredible work out in the field, educating the public. We actually have a group of folks that we call ramp and beach ambassadors, and they go out and provide helpful information to the public about their beach visits. And we've received excellent feedback on the services they're providing. So that's one of the ways that we have risen to the occasion and helped to manage this record-breaking visitation. And we'll just have to see if the trend continues. But my experience so far suggests that we will continue to at least have a lot of visitors here at Cape Hatteras National Seashore. The public is in love with their beaches, particularly Cape Hatteras Seashore beaches. And that's because, as you pointed out before, in some cases they are remote, they are undeveloped. They're also changing. You know, unlike a lot of other national parks, you mentioned Shenandoah. So Shenandoah, I'm guessing, is famous for the changes, the seasonal changes, such as the foliage that becomes beautifully colored in the fall. But generally speaking, the landscape stays the same. The mountains are the same, the valleys are the same, and the rivers and streams and lakes stay the same. Cape Hatteras Seashore changes quite a bit. You look at a place like Cape Point, you look at a place like the southern end of Hatteras Island and realize that over the last decade, we have lost up to 2 miles of the end of that island. So if you were to have stood in that location a couple decades ago, you could have been standing on a beach and seeing a beach that continued for another 2 miles. And if you were to stand in that exact same spot today, you would be just a few feet from Hatteras Inlet, and an inlet that has now expanded by 2 miles. That change can be challenging from a management perspective. In some cases, it can be even disappointing to visitors who want everything to stay the same. But my experience suggests from talking to visitors that it's that change, it's that dynamic environment where the sandbars change, the points change, the waves change, the beaches look different. That is one of the things that folks love about Cape Hatteras National Seashore. And I think people will keep coming back season after season to see what things look like and to enjoy the natural environment.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we hear from our donors and supporters as well, just how much they love and connect to this place, and how, you know, for the most part, this is one of those places where you have generations of a family that have been coming here together and making memories. And so that's one of the things that's very exciting about what we're doing with Outer Banks Forever and working with you all is we are working on some projects that are going to be coming out over the next couple of years. And even most recently, that really help people to experience their national parks in a new way. So we just launched the Oregon Inlet Kayak launch, which is the first designated kayak launch here at Cape Hatteras. And I know a project that we're all very excited about is our Pathways to Your National Parks campaign. So putting in some new multi-use paths that provide not only new ways to experience, but safer ways for people to experience their national parks. So we'll be putting out more information about that. But great segue into going kind of back to your science background. So we do live on a barrier island community, and it's ever changing. We're very, very much in tune with things like the effects of storms and sea level rise. We live at the ocean. And so that is something that we are certainly always taking into account and thinking about. So I know it's a concern for our local community. What is sea level rise impact going to look like? So could you just tell us a little bit about how you all with the National Park Service here in the Outer Banks are responding to the challenge of sea level rise?
Yeah, thanks, Jess. And I pause a little bit when you ask me that question, only because it comes with a tremendous amount of responsibility. And it is turning out to be the number one challenge, not only for me in my career, but most likely for all of the National Park Service employees that will continue to manage places like Cape Hatteras National Seashore and a lot of our coastal parks. It's my opinion that global climate change and sea level rise is and will continue to be the greatest challenge and threat facing our national parks. And it is particularly both personal and front and center at a place like Cape Hatteras National Seashore. I hate to use a cliche, but there is no question that we are at ground zero when it comes to responding to and adapting to climate change and sea level rise. So we really look at this from two different angles, because there is a sea level rise component, and there is also many other factors that come out of global climate change that does impact our parks. So you may read sometimes about an increased frequency of tropical cyclones or things like hurricanes and tropical storms. You also might read about scientists forecasting greater magnitude and intensity of precipitation events. In other words, we might get some really big rainfall events that occur, and we've seen some of those things. And it's a little bit of a challenging topic, sometimes even controversial, because the Outer Banks have always experienced the wrath of Mother Nature when it comes to a dynamic coastal environment and storms. We know, even if we look back to the mid-1800s, before the mid-1800s, Ocracoke Island was not an island. The area that is now known as Ocracoke Island was part of Hatteras Island because there was not an inlet known as Hatteras Inlet. There also was not even an Oregon Inlet at that point. So it is important to take a step back and realize we are already in a really dynamic environment where I love the stickers on people's vehicles that say "Life on a Sandbar" because it's not a joke. It's the real deal when you talk about the Outer Banks. But it is important to recognize that we're already in a very dynamic environment that's changing and being affected by the ocean and by weather. So now you take the climate warming that is occurring across the globe and these predictions for storms, and it puts us in a position for having to think really carefully about how we recover from storms, and in a position of thinking really carefully about what we do in the future. And we're trying to use the best available science to inform those decisions. So for example, if a parking lot is damaged from a storm, does it make sense to put that parking lot in the exact same space back just like it was? Or should we relocate it a little bit further to the west? Or should we maybe put it in an entirely different location? Or perhaps it was just a bad location for a parking lot to begin with, and we need to rethink our transportation to that site. We also start thinking about the way we do things. So rather than paving parking lots, we are now utilizing somewhat more primitive methods that can be easily put back together. So making parking areas out of shell and clay and crushed oyster shells that can be washed over and easily repaired at a lower cost. So we're really thinking creatively, sometimes even going back to the basics about how we create resilient park assets and systems for recreational access and visits. The sea level rise part of this is even a little bit more daunting. So a lot of times people actually are confused about, why is the sea level rising? And there really are two major factors. One is that the ice on the polar ice caps, this is not just ice in the ocean, because if you have we're doing coffee with a ranger. So let's pretend we're talking about iced coffee. If we have ice in our iced coffee cup and that ice melts, it doesn't mean that our coffee cup overflows all of a sudden. The volume inside that cup is generally the same, but the ice that scientists are talking about melting and making the sea level rise is actually ice that is on land that is melting and then draining into the ocean. So that's one of the factors that is making the sea level rise in eastern North Carolina. Another factor is density. and temperature. So warmer things, whether they be a rock or water, are less dense at high temperatures, which basically means they take up more space. So it might be hard to measure, but your cup of hot coffee is actually going to take up a little more space in your coffee cup than a cup of cold coffee. So therefore, that temperature rise in the ocean caused by global climate change causes that ocean to take up a little more space and for the ocean to rise. We actually have a third factor here in Eastern North Carolina and other areas, all the way up to the Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. It's called subsidence. And you probably can detect from the word subside within subsidence that the land is subsiding a little bit. We are basically sinking. So you couple the ocean coming up with the land sinking, and we have some of the fastest rates of sea level rise anywhere in the United States here in Eastern North Carolina. So what does that mean? Well, that means that a lot of things are more difficult, whether it's transportation just on our roadways that might be at low elevation, they can become flooded at high tides. It could mean that our septic systems that require water flowing downhill no longer have as much of a gradient between water flowing from where it is down to the water table and don't function as well. So sea level rise is really also making us rethink everything from the replacement of septic systems to raising roadways to popular places around the seashore, to even protecting historic structures like the Ocracoke Light Station that has now been severely flooded 3 times from both hurricanes Matthew, Florence, and Dorian. And it's causing us to say, what is the best way to preserve this light station? In the case of the Ocracoke Light Station, it is the oldest operating light station in the state of North Carolina. So it's really, really special. But how do we preserve that when the land around the lighthouse is only 2 feet above sea level? How do we preserve that in the face of an increased frequency and magnitude of hurricanes that can cause the ocean to wash over the entire island? And so we're using technology and engineering to come up with solutions. And in some cases, we're having to let go of items that we can just no longer preserve and steward in this dynamic, changing environment. So those are just a few of the examples of what we're doing to address climate change. The foundation of all this, however, is really having good scientific information about the change that is occurring, not just globally, but here in the Outer Banks at places like Cape Hatteras National Seashore. We need the science to know what is happening and what is likely to happen in the future. The second action is to use that science to inform our day-to-day decisions about building and rebuilding and park management. And the third thing that we're doing strategically is, and this is really circling back to the beginning of our conversation, and that is working collaboratively with our partners. Cape Hatteras Seashore and all of our parks rely on a daily basis on our partners to help us manage the parks. Perfect example is Highway 12, starting in South Nags Head, going all the way to Ocracoke Village. We're extremely lucky to have the North Carolina Department of Transportation managing that highway inside of their national park. So we work very closely with them to review the science and talk about sustainable long-term solutions. We work very closely with Dare County and Hyde County to talk about the intersection of everything from providing water and electrical service and even emergency medical services in the face of this changing environment. So that interagency work, that partnership is also really critical when it comes to long-term solutions and adaptation to a changing environment.
Yeah, that's a great overview. I think when people think of sea level rise, they mostly just think of beach erosion, right? That's the thing that they think, oh, we're losing our beaches. But it's interesting to hear that it really does affect decisions on so many different levels, and that you all are really taking the science and trying to make informed decisions. And I think you guys also do a really great job of including the community in that. And, you know, you hold a lot of community meetings. before big decisions are made about, particularly with historic structures and things like that, so that the community not only has an opportunity to have their voice heard, but also that you all can really explain to them a little bit better about why these decisions are being made. It's not, it's not something that you take lightly, stewarding these resources, particularly historic structures and things that people feel very passionate about, as you very well know. So I think that's great to just have a better overview of what does that really mean? What does sea level rise really mean to our community beyond just our beaches getting smaller?
Well, it's great to hear the feedback that we're doing a reasonable job of communicating that. And one of the things that as somebody who's been involved in science in my land management career, that is sometimes a little bit hard to communicate, but so important to communicate, is that science is not an answer, and that science is a process. So I think everybody can see that playing out in an accelerated fashion when it comes to COVID-19. COVID-19 is this novel coronavirus that has become a pandemic, and we can see guidance changing over time because scientists, epidemiologists, and infectious disease specialists and medical doctors are learning very rapidly, by the way, about the virus, about the best way to prevent infection, and about the best way to treat the virus. And while it may be frustrating in some cases, as the science changes and our learning changes, the guidance changes. Well, that really is the same way that land managers approach managing national parks. Science is a process. So the information we have today about erosion, about sea level rise, about even visitor patterns, we know that's going to change over time. So we need to be constantly in touch with the best available science, be aware of that science when it changes, and be ready to adapt and make even better management decisions as science progresses on these topics. So it's really useful to try to get folks to think about science less so as if it's an answer, and more so as a process that improves upon our knowledge base and helps us understand the impacts of our decisions, but it does not make decisions for us.
Yeah, I actually had again, going back to yesterday, talking to Eric Dees from the First Colony Foundation, who's the archaeologist at Fort Raleigh right now. He had a similar thing to say about, the science of archaeology and how it does change. It is an evolution. They may have made assumptions based on data that they uncovered, 20 years ago. And when they find something new on a new archaeological dig, sometimes they go back and it puts a new context on what they found before, and then their story changes. And people sometimes don't always understand, well, that's what you said earlier, and now you're changing your story. It's not that they're changing their story, it's that they have new information that now puts that in a different context. So I think that there are so many branches of science that are happening in our parks. So it's very interesting to talk about and think about that process on not only just sort of the biology, ecology level, but also from a historical perspective, that's the same process.
I agree.
So this has been really great, Dave, talking today, and really appreciate your time. And so as we wrap up, I think we just want to come back again. We're celebrating Public Lands Day this week. And really, it's just a day for us to all take a step back and just show some love for our public lands. So can you just tell us, what is your favorite way to enjoy your Outer Banks National Parks?
Yeah, my favorite way, well, it's hard to pick one favorite, but my favorite way to enjoy the Outer Banks National Parks is to either be in the water, right off the beach on a surfboard, feeling the power of the waves safely on a low rip current risk day, looking back at the beach and just enjoying the incredible gifts that the ocean and the waves provide for recreation at the seashore, or being on the other side of the barrier island, maybe just a few dozen feet off the shoreline in a kayak, looking down at Pamlico Sound, the bottom of Pamlico Sound, and the seagrass beds as the current is, whisking the water over those beds, seeing everything from the shrimp and the fish that are growing up in that incredible nursery. And in many cases, looking back at either the Cape Hatteras or Body Island Lighthouse, and just being in awe of the amazing history and natural resources that are meshed together here in the Outer Banks. Those are my favorite things to do.
Yeah, that's great. I agree. I'm really excited to take my kayak down to our new Oregon Inlet kayak launch. I haven't gotten down there with it yet, and just paddle around. I think there's nothing more calming and just sort of brings that connection to nature just right to you. And I know that that's what a lot of people really love, just being in or near the water here. All right, well, Dave, thank you so much again for your time and for joining us today and talking all about our public lands. And if you all want more information, make sure you visit our website, obxforever.org. You can find our e-newsletter there. We send that out once a month and share more stories like this, things that Dave has talked about. We're trying to not only tell you about projects and things that you can do to help protect and enhance your national parks here in the Outer Banks, but also really just to expand our parks reach and tell more of the stories that you may not know about. So thank you, Dave, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Jess. Thanks to you and Outer Banks Forever, your board members, and all the members of the public that are supporting Outer Banks Forever. It's so nice to have such incredible friends, and you're helping us achieve the mission of the Park Service. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Dave.